Hi, everyone. Let me do a quick sound check to make sure that you can hear me well and loud and clear. So I'm waiting for a confirmation from our team in Budapest, from Lenke and Veronica, who are helping me run today's live webcast on the 2020 EPSO law competitions. Let me quickly peek at my secondary communication channel. Sound is good. Everything is great. Excellent. Thank you so much for being here and taking a little time off your summer. You might be even on holiday or you might be working. In any case, why don't you type into the chat box where you are dialing in from to make sure that we see the chat works fine and to get a sense of where everybody is joining us from. So type that into the chat box and let's see who is dialing in from the most furthest away from Brussels, though many of you are in Brussels, Greece, Tallinn, Italy, Luxembourg, excellent, Lithuania, Finland, Germany, excellent, a lot of places, Corsica, lucky you, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. And now that you practice typing into the chat box, do use this particular feature, because that's where you can put in questions at today's live session. Wow, we even have someone from the USA who probably won the competition of dialing in from the furthest away, though Brazil is also in competition. Great. So with that, do ask questions while I present to you today. If you're listening right now to the live session, but we're recording this session, so you might be listening to the recorded version. In that case, you will need to send us a message through the contact form or an email, and we'll be happy to follow up and provide you advice to the best of our abilities. So with that, let me get started. Do a sound check. Hopefully everything works fine. If not, in most cases, you just need to restart a browser or use a different browser, and then everything will work just as planned. I'll have my video on for a while. Maybe I'll turn it off after a bit. But I'm working from home today, and this time I'm in Hungary. So hopefully I won't get any interruptions. At least I made sure with the family. But the video is secondary. The most important is perhaps my explanations and whatever you see on the screen. And that is something that we will share with you after the webinar, along with the recording and everything else. A few words about my background. You might know that I'm one of the co-founders of EU Training, and you are possibly familiar with the Ultimate EU Testbook, which has been in publication since 2005, and the most recent editions came out quite recently. So as I said before, in case you miss anything, then within a day, we will send you basically everything. So we'll give you the full recording, we'll give you the presentation slides, and we'll give you also a full transcript of all the wisdom I'm sharing with you right now. Hopefully everything will be as accurate as it should be, but there comes a little legal disclaimer with the caveat that if any information contradicts whatever you see from official EPSO communication or in the notice of competition, that certainly takes precedence. So we are doing everything to be accurate. But again, the source of 100% reliable legal information is in the notice of competition and whatever information you get from the selection board or EPSO itself. So with that, let's get started. And just a few words about EU Training. You might be familiar with the many services and the many things we provide. We have a beautiful, great community with 100,000 registered users over the over 10 years that we've been in business, with 53,000 fans and followers on Facebook, where we share a lot of information. So if there is a very quick update that we think our community would be interested in, then definitely go to our Facebook page. You will be notified and you will be the first to hear if there's a new competition coming out, or if there is perhaps an update of an existing competition because the reserve list has been published, or there's some rumor circulating. We usually share that as well. And then many test packages that we encourage you to look into. It's a question database of 25,000 questions. We are constantly adding new ones, and this is something I'll come back to later. We've just added an impressive number of language comprehension tests, and that's a special kind of test which is very relevant for the particular competition we are covering today, the 85 law, because that's a relatively new kind of test. You will be required to sit multiple choice tests on language comprehension. So we just added, and now it's available in 13 languages. So many questions used. Webinars are available similar to this one, and there are a lot of methodology webinars as well, where you might want to brush up on your mathematics skills for the numerical reasoning, and a lot of methodology for all the other aspects and elements of the competition. At the end of today's webinar, I'll be happy to share with you a special exclusive offer. So you can use a special discount code for 48 hours to take advantage of all these great preparation materials. And it's probably worth waiting until the end, but I hope that the content itself will make it worthwhile as well. So let's get started. Perhaps the first question you might ask, if you're less familiar with the EPSO competitions, the European Personal Selection Office run competitions, is how does it work in general? Well, it's a competition to select suitable candidates. In the end, you are placed on a so-called reserve list. And once you are there, you are recruitable. So it's not a recruitment exam, it's a selection exam. And once you are on the reserve list, that's when the recruitment actually happens. And you might wonder where you will end up working for the European Union. The most likely answer for that question is Brussels or Luxembourg. That's where basically all the EU institutions are. The official seat of the European Parliament is in Strasbourg, but it has almost no presence in Strasbourg from an administrative bureaucratic standpoint. Essentially, it's Brussels and Luxembourg that a lawyer would work for one of the European institutions. And I use this term, one of the European institutions, because it's not exclusively for the European Commission. It's not for the Court of Justice of the EU that you might work for, but any of the EU's institutions, all of the ones listed on the screen. So Commission, Parliament, Council of Ministers, Court of Justice, but also the European Court of Auditors might hire you, Committee of Regions or Economic and Social Committee. So all of these, as legally classified as institutions, might be able to hire you, depending on vacancies. It all depends whether you can be hired because there's actually an opening. The most likely employer is the European Commission. Currently, it employs about 33,000 staff, some of whom are permanent staff and some of whom are temporary agents or contract agents or have different legal status, but that's the employer with the largest headcount. Hence, it's most likely that you will end up working in the European Commission, also because all the European Commission departments actually need lawyers. They are formulating policy, they represent the institution in front of the Court of Justice, in negotiations with other institutions. So Commission is a big machinery that definitely needs lawyers, but all the other institutions obviously are heavily invested in policy making, in legal matters, in administrative matters, which require legal knowledge. This is only decided at the moment of recruitment. So as I mentioned before, you are placed in the end on a reserve list, and where you actually end up working is decided at the moment of recruitment. So at this point, there's no clear answer where you might work or which institution might hire you. But again, Luxembourg is just as likely as Brussels. It also depends what the institutions themselves have indicated to EPSO what their hiring needs are likely to be. So at this point, they kind of predicted that we would need a certain number of permanent lawyers at this institution, and they pulled that into the notice of competition or into the actual competition and decided, okay, this is how many places we are advertising, and in the end, we will hire accordingly. So with that, here's the answer, which is probably widely known because it was published in the notice of competition itself. So there are 104 positions available. What does it actually mean? It means that once the competition has been successfully completed, there will be 104 names on the competition or on the reserve list, which is then published in the official journal, unless you opted out from publication due to privacy reasons, which you have the right to do. But normally, there will be 104 names on the reserve list, possibly in about 6 to 9 months, with the usual disclaimers that many things can throw the competition schedule off the original plan. But normally in about 9 months, there will be an official journal in which that reserve list for the 85 lawyer competition laureates, which is again a technical term, will be published, and all of those 104 individuals will be eligible to be hired by one of the European Union institutions. This number might slightly change, actually. So this is an indication, very slightly might change because it depends on the candidates themselves, on you, and how you perform throughout the exam. So the exact number might very slightly vary, but this is the benchmark number that the institutions are using, or EPSO itself is using. That's how many people they want to hire. Let's put that in perspective. This is a pretty big competition. So for EU standards, this is a large competition for lawyers. 104 tends to be, I mean, it is considered as a pretty significant number, especially for AD level, so administrator level jobs. Recently, about a month ago, EPSO announced another competition for secretaries, which was even larger than this one. But that's a different status. That's a different line in the staff regulations with different salary, different benefits, different responsibilities. So for administrator level, which is sort of the top level in terms of responsibilities and requirements of degrees, something we'll come back to in a moment. So this is a very highly sought after position to have a lawyer position at 85 level in the institutions. Having said that, 85, so the 5 means it's entry level. So it's entry level, meaning no work experience is required. There are certain formal qualifications or background that is required for you to be eligible, and that is something I'll look at in a moment. But work experience is not required. So you can be a fresh graduate out of university with a degree in law, and you can apply for this competition. So if you just got your degree a couple months ago, then you can certainly apply for this competition. Where the work experience might play some role, or it does play some role, is the time of the recruitment. So getting some work experience as a lawyer or in a legal field until then, so while the competition is ongoing, is probably a good idea. It will increase your chances of getting hired in the end once you are successful and you are on the reserve list. But in formal terms, to be eligible to apply, you don't need any work experience. All right, so what is the deadline? Deadline is 15th of September. That's pretty good news. You can still go to the beach if you're allowed to leave your confined home. Hopefully most of Europe is already relatively free, and hopefully it stays that way. You can do whatever you wish until 15th of September, but please don't leave the application to the very last moment. Servers tend to crash. You might forget, you might have a last minute emergency you need to take care of, and then you miss the deadline. You can do it a week before, and then you're pretty safe and you don't need to worry about that. The application is pretty straightforward. You need to fill out tons of forms, answer a couple of questions. That's pretty clear cut. There's not much, let's say, mental effort that requires an application. What does require a lot of mental effort and preparation is the actual selection and the selection exams, the kind of tests that you need to sit in order to succeed and be placed on the reserve list in the end. Are you eligible? This is the most fundamental question of any competition. First and foremost, you can apply for any number of EU competitions you wish. There is no limitation whatsoever, but wait for the tiny footnote. I'm going to say, unless the notice of competition itself excludes your multiple applications to different exams. Now, this is not the case for the current exam, so the EU 85 lawyer exam. You can apply for other competitions that might come up in the next few months. If you are already at the institutions and you are enrolled in the internal competition, you can do it in parallel. If you are completely outside the institutions and you actually sign up, let's say, for the secretary exam because you qualify for that, you can do the same. So as long as you meet the formal eligibility criteria, you are free to apply for any number of EU competitions. When it comes to this particular one, the main question is, are you eligible? Can you actually apply? Do you have the formal documentation and background to be eligible? What do you need? It's pretty straightforward. Well, you have a couple of general conditions. You need to have EU citizenship. And a note to our British friends. So despite the transition period and all that, the UK is no longer an EU member. So its EU citizenship does not apply there. But everyone else in the EU 27, as long as you have a passport, EU citizenship, you are eligible, at least when it comes to the general conditions. And you need to have completed your military service if that is a requirement in your country. I'm not familiar in which countries this is still a formal requirement, but again, depends on your specific status or citizenship. I would have guessed actually Greece, that Greece is still requiring military service. You need to have completed it, or you might need to provide some proof that you are exempted for one reason or another. And Clara says also from Spain. So thank you. This is a truly crowdsourced answer. So, and I'm getting still more, even in Austria. Wow. Okay, I learned something today. Thank you, everyone. So Spain, Greece, and Austria apparently still requires military service, and Finland, but there's disagreement on Spain. Well, we're not going to debate that right now, but at least make sure to check it and make sure that you meet those requirements. And then meet the character requirements of the job. So if you're a convicted criminal, you are not much welcome to work for the EU institutions, at least not as an administrator, and excuse my cynicism, but make sure that you meet those basic criteria, and you might need to provide some certification depending on the country that you meet these so-called moral requirements. But more importantly are two main aspects we need to discuss. That's the language rules and the degrees or diplomas, if you will. Let's look at the language rules first. So languages, well, there are 24 official languages in the EU, as you probably know. There are many other languages spoken, obviously, but they might not have the status of an official language. So if you are a Russian speaker, or you speak Luxembourgish, or many other regional languages, well, that's great, but they might not be recognized as an EU official language. So you need to choose from one of those 24 official languages as your language one. That's why they no longer use terms like mother tongue or any similar concepts. It has to be a so-called language one from the EU24 official languages, at minimum C1 level, which is a thorough knowledge. So you need to be pretty fluent in writing, in spoken, and reading comprehension in that particular language. And this can be anything. I'm Hungarian. My mother tongue is Hungarian. I speak fairly good English and French and Spanish. I have the choice to pick any of these because all of these languages happen to be EU official languages. Unlike language 2, because language 2 has to be either English, excuse me, or French, and it has to be different from language 1. So I could actually choose maybe language 1 as French and language 2 as English, or vice versa, regardless of what my mother tongue is or the language I really speak the most fluently. That is entirely up to me. So it's not linked to citizenship in any way. It's entirely your choice. Now, here's a bit of method or a bit of trick into it, how you should choose the languages if you have the liberty to pick basically any combination that you see on the screen. For language 1, I generally advise candidates to choose a language in which their passive understanding is the greatest. So if you have really good reading comprehension and understanding the words, the vocabulary, and you can quickly process information, you can quickly read in a given question, pick that language that you master the most in a relatively passive manner. When it comes to language 2, try to pick a language in which you can express yourself in the most eloquent and detailed manner. So if you're really good in spoken English, perhaps choose English as language 2, because that's the language you'll be required to use in the assessment center. and even before the assessment center. So make sure that in that language, you can easily run a role play exercise, or you can easily do an oral presentation. This is a little consideration. Not all candidates and not many candidates will have the liberty or even the luxury of choosing languages so deliberately. But if you know multiple languages, this is an interesting concept to bear in mind. Number two, what about German? And I see that there's a question here, why German might be missing from language 2. And that's interesting. German is one of the official working languages of the European Union. So in operational terms, German is always mentioned besides English and French. And yet it's missing here. Well, for one, I hope it's not going to make the basis of a challenge, of a legal challenge against this particular notice of competition, because there were precedents from Italy and Spain when their languages were not mentioned or not used as one of the exam languages, or that was related actually to the publication of the notice of competition and similar topics. So that created legal problems. And I hope that the lack of German as language 2, as an option for language 2, is not going to create such legal problems. EPSO has pretty good lawyers. They probably hired them based on earlier competitions, but this is probably well documented and well reasoned. Why is it still missing? It's probably for simple technical operational reasons. So the selection board may not be prepared to run assessment centers in German. And also for the job that you will be required to do as a lawyer may not require actually any German knowledge. And English and French have a pretty important or priority role or priority place as a language in the legal work that lawyers in the institutions are required to do. So let me take a quick peek at my channel to see what questions have come in. So do we need to have an official C1 certificate for English and French? No, you are not required to provide any DELE, DALF, Oxford, whatever certificate there is. You just need to speak those languages at the required level. So this is what they expect of you, and the actual testing of your linguistic knowledge will be done through the competition. The multiple choice tests, the assessment center, the intermediate tests, and all the rest will basically test your knowledge at those levels. Question number 2, any advantages or disadvantages for choosing English or French as language 2? I think this is something I just covered. So hopefully that gives you a bit of orientation. I'm kind of speculating or thinking what other aspects might there be. Certainly, if there's a group in the assessment center where everybody is a French speaker, obviously a language is not just a way of putting words together. It's culture, it's dynamics, it's interpersonal communication. So it has a lot of depth. So perhaps if you're more comfortable, let's say in a French group, when it comes to a role play exercise, you might want to pick French. Whereas an English group or an English speaking group might be slightly different in the group dynamics, slightly linked to which language is being spoken at that particular meeting. So you can go to this direction if you have the liberty, the luxury of choosing a language as language 2. Otherwise, you pick the one in which you can really express yourself with the greatest ease. Good, let's go on and look at further rules. Well, I mentioned that language 1 and 2 must be different, so you certainly cannot choose English for both language 1 and 2. And if you've chosen English for language 1, you are obliged to use French as language 2 and vice versa. Now, here's the trickiest part when it comes to the actual degree, the qualification that you are required to have to be eligible for this particular competition. For this one, there are 2 options. So you need to have either of the 2 that you see on the screen, clearly outlined in the notice of competition. So you either need to have a completed university degree of at least 4 years, attested by a diploma in law. So if you studied, say, 3 years in a particular university, and it gave you the title of lawyer, 3 years would not qualify you for this particular competition. I see here's a question: will LLBs in EU law, for example, be considered as law degree? Now, LLB, I'm not familiar, and I might ask you back, dear participant, how many years of studies is that? Is an LLB? I understand it's a law degree. I would have guessed, but is it 3 years or 4 years? Because if it's 3 years, yes, usually 3 years, so that will not qualify you. Then comes the second option, where you need to be authorized to pursue professional activities as a lawyer in an EU member state. So again, with the big legal disclaimer talking about lawyer, right? That this is our interpretation and it might need to be corroborated by EPSO. But we checked with a few lawyers, and this is our, again, our most honest and most professional interpretation of the rules, is that you need to have a bar exam in place for the second option, if that's what applies for you, right? So you need to be authorized to pursue professional activities as a lawyer in an EU member state, which requires a bar exam basically everywhere. So again, this probably need to be clarified in one way or another, because I understand that this might lead to some confusion. So I know for instance, in Hungary, you cannot be a fully fledged lawyer unless you have a bar exam, which is at least additional 3 years after having completed your university studies, which actually happen to be 5 years. So there are a lot of, I see there are a lot of comments there, so I'll try to take a quick look at those. But then again, this is the way we interpret these rules, and it might need to be clarified by EPSO, actually, or the selection board, to avoid any confusion. But here's another thing to bear in mind. This is an 85 competition, right? So this does not require any work experience. So if you are required to have worked basically 3 years, because you may not be able to complete a bar exam otherwise, there seems to be a slight contradiction there. So to me, it's not 100% clear situation, given the nature of what it is that your professional activities as a lawyer. So is it a lawyer in front of a court, or is it a lawyer as a corporate counsel, or some sort of maybe a public administration official or something similar? But I guess that most candidates, the vast majority of candidates, would fall in the first category, where you have a legal degree of at least 4 years attested by a diploma in law. I see that there's a couple of comments coming in, which I don't have the mental bandwidth to quickly look at it, but it's something we'll check after the webinar. But I see my colleagues are flagging up one question, and it says, is it necessary to hold a degree with a specialization in European law, or perhaps an Italian university degree in national law is adequate? You don't need any EU law specialization. That will benefit you for sure on your performance at the exam, later in the job. There are many ways that it can add to you, but it's not a formal requirement you need to have. So if you've never dealt with EU law and you have no idea what Cassis de Dijon is other than a great liquor, then it's still perfectly fine. So you don't need an EU law specialization. Where it comes in very handy is certainly the role play exercise and the actual assessment center. So if you go there knowing nothing about any of the case law or the different the competence of EU courts, or what direct effect means, all the legal terms and the legal concepts, which are sort of EU law 101, you'll be in trouble because you won't perform well. But no formal degree is actually required in EU law, but a law that gives you the title, a degree in law with at least 4 years of studies. I see one more question before I move on. So how does any previous experience in the legal area impact the chances for this competition where no previous working experience is required? Well, experience in the legal area, again, it's the knowledge that will count. So in the exam itself, they will not require you to show any proof of employment or any proof of work experience, because that's not required. Knowing EU law, because you have experience there, obviously benefits you at the especially at the role play exercise and the different parts of the assessment center, it will be great. And at the time of employment, the same thing will be true, that a future employer, let's say in DG Energy at the European Commission, says, I need a lawyer because we are just entering some trialogues, and let's see who the candidates on the reserve list are. And here's a candidate who has experience in EU energy law. That's certainly a pretty positive sign. Okay, let's move on. And I know that there are many comments and questions, and we will look at that as I promised after the webinar, but I want to make sure I cover everything I planned to cover for today. And again, feel free to have conversations among yourselves, but please pay attention, because there might be other pieces of information others may have heard, or there's some knowledge that is worth sharing among you that definitely benefits the community. Why is this a great opportunity? If we talk about the actual practical side of it, and I probably don't need to preach to the converted that you are all interested in becoming lawyers or working in legal jobs for the European Union institutions, it's a great opportunity because salaries are pretty attractive. We actually on eutraining.eu have a salary simulator calculator where you can input certain data and you can find out how much your future salary will likely be. It's not exactly going to be that amount, but it gives you a rough indication. For the 85 law jobs, if you are not married and or have no kids, but you relocate from one of the EU countries, so you're not already living in Brussels, this would be around 4,500-ish, between 4,000 and 5,000 euros net per month. And this is also, there's additionally a very good health insurance scheme that goes with it. And if you have kids or later, if I said the simulation assumes you move there without kids, but there are European schools where kids are taught in the native languages or the main languages of the parents. And there are very different rules if the parents are speaking different languages or coming from different places. But anyways, there are lots of in-kind and salary benefits to these kind of opportunities. The main question of today, how to get these jobs? Well, you need to pass the competition and then secure a job. Simple, right? Well, to some degree, it is simple, but there's a pretty fierce competition. So there are a lot of candidates and the tests tend to be pretty tough. So let's look at what you need to do in order to succeed. There are different formal and informal steps. So there's eligibility declaration, that you are eligible for the competition based on all the criteria we have discussed. You need to pick your language 1 and 2. An application can be submitted in any of the EU's 24 languages. Validate everything by the 15th of September. Don't leave it to the last moment. As I said before, make sure you respect the deadlines. Then comes the main first step, the pre-selection test. This is often referred to as a CBT exam. CBT refers to computer-based test. So these are computer-administered exams. Currently, this happens in a test center. Whether they might change it to everybody being able to do the test online on their computers, probably not, or at least not until that deadline or until the competition is due, which will likely be around October. So if 15th of September is the deadline, probably around mid-October, mid-late October, the CBT exam will take place. And as I said, most likely in test centers. If the coronavirus situation gets worse by then, we'll see what solutions they might come up with. In worst case scenario, they might postpone that slightly. But again, we'll see what sort of measures are going to be in place at that time. There's a verbal reasoning test, a numerical reasoning test, an abstract reasoning test, and a so-called language comprehension test. Now, all of these tests are, as a package, are eliminatory. Their primary purpose is to limit or actually shrink the number of candidates that will be eligible for the next step. They are probably expecting several thousand candidates. And these are tests which are objectively have been proven to be a sort of a level playing field where everybody starts with the same chances, and they try to decrease the number who will proceed to the next stage. So they don't have basically almost anything to do with your final job. So if you are an excellent trial lawyer, abstract reasoning is not really the kind of thing you will ever deal with, at least not in that form. But these are eliminatory tests as part of the pre-selection of this particular competition. What do they look like? Well, they are administered in language 1, 20 questions, and you have, I think, 35? That's right. I had to move my little window there to make sure that I'm not saying anything contradictory. 35 minutes to answer these questions. So 20 questions and 35 minutes, fairly feasible, though verbal reasoning, the text passages tend to be relatively long, so you need to read very fast. You might even want to take some speed reading course, which some of our clients have done in the past. They've shared that information with us, so that might be a good idea. But certainly there's always a text passage, there's a question, 4 statements, and 1 correct answer. So unlike some other often French or other national administration concours, so competitions or selection exams or university tests or entrance exams, here at the EPSO universe, you only have 1 correct answer. And they would confuse you with outside information, with generalizations, with possibility versus fact, similar wording. So it's not a very easy exercise. On the face of it, it is, but you need to pay close attention to be time efficient. And then this was the verbal reasoning. Then comes numerical reasoning. This is about data and numbers. So you have 10 questions and 20 minutes, so 2 minutes per question. Done again in language 1. And basically, the very quick method you need to apply, you're presented with a chart with numbers and figures, and you need to find the right answer from that information. So first you interpret the data, then you reason, you think, you try to understand which pieces do I need to pay attention to and use. Number 3 is estimation or guesstimation. Sometimes you can find the right answer already by doing rough mental calculation, but occasionally you might want to just use the on-screen calculator which you are given in the computer interface and actually do a calculation. Again, typically pretty feasible, but it takes a bit more time usually than what you are given. So you need to be very efficient. That's why practice becomes essential. And you may have heard me say this before if you've heard other webinars I've run. This is a bit like running 100 meters in the Olympics. Most people with a relatively decent physical outfit and health can run 100 meters, but the Olympic champions do it in an incredibly short time. So here again, most candidates can find the right answer in verbal reasoning, in numerical reasoning, but not everyone can do it so fast. And that's why you need to be well trained to succeed. Then comes number 3, abstract reasoning. There it's pretty tough because the time pressure is even higher, 10 questions in 10 minutes. You need to find quickly which one is the next in the series, that you're presented with a sequence of, abstract charts, and find the next one that should follow in that sequence. So again, it's slightly odd if you haven't done such kind of test before. Some people actually get to like it a lot, others can't stand it, but this helps them evaluate candidates with their abstract reasoning abilities. Some people tend to be really good in verbal and abstract, others are numerical reasoning stars. Out of the 3, usually there's one where you are really strong and one where most candidates are rather weak. So perhaps pay close attention and evaluate your scores where you might need the most training and the most attention. And then comes number 4, which is a relatively new kind of test. This is the language comprehension test. Here you have 12 questions and 25 minutes. Again, not incredibly difficult. It's essentially 2 minutes per question. And it's a language comprehension test in the sense that it's not verbal reasoning. They're not going to trick you. It's not so much on logic. It's not so much on the reasoning side. This is really a linguistic test, the kind that you would face if you were to do an Oxford fluency exam. I'm not sure what the exact name is, or a DALF or other similar language tests, which give you a certificate in the end, or TOEFL for English, and there are many others. Here, there's some verbal reasoning in the sense that you need to understand the text passage. You need to understand what is true, what is not true, but it's not so much on the logic. It's just finding the right word and what the meaning is. It's truly your vocabulary, your understanding of what you read, and not so much on the logic of what you read. I hope that makes some sense. So verbal comprehension and verbal fluency. So we gave you a couple of examples here. So what does a given word like expatriate? I'm not sure that's the way to pronounce it. It's not expatriate, which was the first thing that I read, but the R is missing. So expatriate is, I think it's explain something in a very eloquent manner or in a very detailed manner. So there, it's your vocabulary, and also understanding what a given text is trying to explain to you. So understanding the broad concept, saying, what does the author think, right? So this is in language 1. This is in language 1, and I'm emphasizing it because as we go on, you'll see this kind of test coming back in the next phase as well. So what do we have here? We basically have the verbal, numerical, abstract reasoning, and the language comprehension. And the pass marks are what you see on the screen. The good news for this particular competition is that the numerical and the abstract reasoning, the scores are combined. So if you're really terrible in numerical reasoning and you're pretty okay with abstract reasoning, you can still pass. So you can get 0 points in numerical reasoning and 8 points in the abstract, and you can still pass. That might be a big relief to many lawyers who are very good with regulations and precedents and case law, but they are not so much shining when it comes to numerical reasoning. Verbal reasoning, you need to have 10 out of 20. And then you have the language comprehension where the score is relatively high. So you can see that 8 out of 12. And you need to have that relatively high score. It's over 50%. It's probably 60 or so. So make sure that you really master that. And if you pick as language 1 something that a language you really speak fluently, probably you will be just fine. You might want to practice at least a couple just to be familiar with the interface, with the length of the test, with the style of questions that you'll be required to answer. But once you've done that, you probably will be okay. So make sure that all 4 you're familiar with, and you really focus on where you feel your performance is the weakest. The interesting thing here is that pass mark is enough. So there's no true competition in a classic sense among candidates. So as long as you reach the pass mark, the ones that are indicated on the screen, so 10 for verbal, 8 for the combined numerical and abstract, and 8 for the language comprehension, once you've reached those scores, you're good. You're passing to the next phase. You're not ranked compared to other candidates. So you don't need to be among the top performing verbal or numerical reasoning gurus compared to other candidates. All you need to do is pass. What about the next step? So once you've done it and you get the good news in your EPSO account saying, we're happy to let you know that you have passed to the next stage. The next stage is actually a so-called intermediate test. There's no more E-tray exercise. There's no more situational judgment test. All of these have been discontinued, or at least not used in this particular competition. But there is a so-called intermediate test. Now, intermediate test is a language comprehension test again, but this time in language 2. again, 12 questions in 25 minutes. It's pretty much the same idea. So you have a text passage and you are being asked about vocabulary, what it means, the general meaning, and your understanding. The pass mark here is slightly lower than in the first phase. So you have 6 out of 12. That's a 50% requirement. It's pretty feasible. And again, the pass mark is enough for this one. And it's not going to count towards your final score. This is something you just have to do. You just have to demonstrate your linguistic skills in that particular language, but pass mark is enough. What about the next one? It's still as part of the intermediate test. So you had another language comprehension, and you have a so-called field-related MCQ, multiple choice question. So field-related meaning that's where your EU law knowledge becomes important. So here, or at least by this point in the competition, you should be very much up to date on EU law matters. So in practical terms, in exam preparation methodology or strategy is you don't need to start learning about EU law right now. Obviously, it's very beneficial if you're willing to do that and refresh your Craig the Burka and whichever textbook you might want to use and look at the most recent case law of the European Court of Justice and look at the basics of EU legal principles and anything that's related. But at this point in the competition, that's when you will really need to be at the top of your game. When is this going to be? Let me guess. If we assume everything goes according to plan and the virus doesn't disrupt the planning. So 15th of September is deadline. The first round, the pre-selection will likely be mid-October, second half of October, I guess. And then intermediate will possibly be around late November, maybe sometime in December. And again, very rough estimate with no hard data to back it up. So by December, you should be pretty much up to speed on EU law, at least. It might be pushed to January, but again, it gives you a rough idea how to plan your preparation. And then the pass mark here is 20 out of 40. So you need to have at least 50%. And actually, it's not enough just to pass. Here is where the real competition comes in. You need to be among the top candidates. So you need to be among the top scoring candidates in order to pass to the next phase. So you don't need to have, or it's not enough to have only 20 points, for instance, but you need to have maybe 30, 35, because the competition at this point will be pretty fierce. So my guess would be if you aim for 35 points, that's a high ambition, and that will grant you the opportunity to pass to the next stage. But again, it's a rough estimate. It all depends on how well prepared the other candidates are, or if they ask you a question about some completely unheard of case law or legal issue, and no other candidate is able to answer that question, well, you are all in the same boat. But again, it's a very diverse audience, and everybody's coming from a very diverse background, despite having a degree in EU law. So you never know who might perform better or worse. Okay, let's look at the next one, and I'm just waiting for my slide to load. So while that happens, let me take a look at a couple of questions. Will language comprehension be linked to legal vocabulary? I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think that they might ask what is an what was that thing? Interlocutory injunction. I think that was the term many years ago that I had to translate as a budding lawyer linguist, and nobody really knew what that term actually meant. But to answer your question, most probably the language comprehension test will not be linked to legal vocabulary, because it's probably going to be the same pool of questions that they are using for other competitions as well. So they will probably not develop only for this particular competition questions on legal comprehension. What else? Are the field-related questions the same as the CAST FG4 law questions? I wouldn't say same. There might be some sort of similarities and overlap because the CAST exams, or the contract agent exams, the function group 4, that's pretty much the same level as an 85 lawyer. So there might be quite some similarities, but I have no way of telling whether they use the same database or not. But similarities, certainly. How is the work-life balance for EU officials? Is it attractive? It's a fascinating question. I'm not sure I'll answer right now, and it largely depends on where you are. If you are working in DG competition, the workload tends to be extremely heavy. If you're dealing with, say, the tech sector or energy or environment issues and the competition aspects of it, whereas other departments and other commission directors general might have a much less heavy workload. So it really depends on the kind of job you do. But back to the competition. Is the level of computer-based tests slightly easier than the generalist 85 exams? I don't think it's going to be easier. And I don't think it's going to be more difficult either. So it's most probably, since it's 85, so the level, whether it's 85 or 87, usually that has an impact on the difficulty of the tests. Not so much whether it's lawyer or generalist of the computer-based tests, so the pre-selection tests that we talked about. Okay, I see there are a couple of other questions, but let me still cover the core presentation topics for today, as we only have about 9 minutes left. So assessment center is the phase number 3. So we have the pre-selection test, the intermediate, and now we have the assessment center. So if you got so far, that's pretty great because you are one step away from being placed on the reserve list. How many people will be invited? Well, approximately 3 times. So we saw that it's about 104 candidates in the end. So roughly 300, 315 candidates will be invited to the assessment center. Those take place in Brussels in language 2. So you'll be required to go to Brussels. They cover your tickets or whatever means of transport you need to use, with based on certain flat rate and indicators. But you get there, and it's essentially a series of tests and exams in a given day. So there are 4 types of exercises. There are 2 role plays, which is a relatively new thing. It used to be a group exercise, but now it's role play. So you are probably going to be given a mandate, a position that you need to represent. Let's say you are the lawyer of the Secretariat General of the European Commission, or in the Secretariat General of the European Commission. Another person is a lawyer in the legal service of the European Commission. Another person is a legal advisor in the European Parliament. So this could be the roles, and you as a group need to discuss, perhaps even negotiate, certain legal questions around a given matter. So there are 2 of these in the assessment center. And then there's a competency-based interview. That is pretty classic. So that's where they ask you questions about situations from your past. So tell me a situation when you had to undergo a lot of stress, which is a question aimed at testing your resiliency skills. So the competency-based interview is not a job interview. Okay, it looks at certain competencies as communication, as group working or team working, of delivering quality and results, of accuracy, and similar things. And then there's an oral presentation. So you're given a briefing and you stand up and present, right? So you have a whiteboard, which you can use, and use a sheet and present on a given topic on which you have been briefed. But that briefing, you have very little time, usually 10, 15 minutes to read that. And you need to stand up and present to the selection board members. And then they will ask you questions based on the file that you have covered. So this is a pretty challenging exercise. Obviously, you can practice for this. And we have lots of courses in person in Brussels at our training center. And often we do webinars on this, and there's one-on-one coaching available as well. And then there's a written test in the field, which used to be called case study. It's basically, again, based on some background materials, you are required to draft perhaps a legal memo or some submission or a specific analysis on a legal matter. So the way they score this, so there are 8 competencies that you are evaluated on, and these are publicly known: leadership, communication, resiliency, working with others, etc. And each worth is 10 points. So you need to get at least 40 points out of 80. And there's a pass mark of, 40 out of 80. And then there's a written test in the field, the one that I mentioned before. There, the pass mark is different. So there you can get a maximum 100 points, and you need to have at least 50. So this is pretty tough. So by the time you get to this stage of in the competition, I advise you really to take it very seriously, because you're very close to succeeding, but pay a lot of attention to the methodology, to everything, the actual substance of EU legal knowledge, and everything that it entails, so that you can eventually get on the reserve list, but only those with the highest overall points will get there, right? So this is where the true competition comes back. You need to get a lot of points. And on the reserve list, the number of places, we know that it's 104. Validity is usually 1 year, but it could be longer if there are many people still who have not been hired, or there's any reason why still a few people remain who are not placed into specific jobs, because that's when the actual recruitment happens. Now, how to get the job? Well, practice a lot. Practice, we usually advise for 3 to 4 months. Again, depending on the intensity. You look at, as an analogy, like a sports competition preparation. Depends on which condition you are currently. So if you are an actively practicing lawyer, you deal with these matters a lot, and you're very good in numerical reasoning, you're a master of abstract reasoning, and your language comprehension skills are just fascinating, well, you probably need less practice. But if you've never dealt with any of these, I advise you to take it pretty seriously and prepare perhaps 1 hour per day or 10 hours per week. Make yourself a plan. That's pretty much the most important piece of advice, is be very deliberate, very conscious about practicing and preparing. There is methodology. I think an E is missing there. It could be mythology, but it's methodology. So there is a specific way where you can master these tests. And as I said before, it's often the speed. And to get speed, you need technique. It's a little bit like maybe cycling or skiing or any sport where speed is of the essence. There's tons of methodology out there. And we have ebooks, we have webinars, we have incredible amount of free materials. And if you want to go deeper, we have paid services. Look at those, and everything is all available on EU training. And ultimately, persistence is a fundamental factor, that you do simulations, that you just don't give up, right? And then a couple of points on the resources that we make available for you. So this is the website you're probably familiar with because you registered for this very webinar, but we are here to help you. Ask us questions, send us emails. We're really happy to provide guidance, and we'll always be very honest. If we don't know something, we'll tell you, but most things and most questions we're able to answer, because we've heard a lot of interesting questions and specific, unique situations that some of you might be in. Good news, verbal reasoning is available in 19 languages, and the language comprehension is in 13 languages. So that's something that we're very proud of. We just uploaded a huge number of tests. All of that is available on the website, and I encourage you to check those out. And stay tuned for a second before I show you the final offer and the discounted offer. But first, some word on the webinars, which are, again, available as free versions and pro tips as well. And as mentioned before, from coaching to free demo to tips and tricks and ebooks, all can be found on the site. And actually, there are a lot of Facebook groups that we encourage to create. And there's one on the 85 exams. So you might want to join it to share information with your peers and colleagues and competitors. But it's still a great community. The books are also available. And then the special discount, which I leave on the screen while I check maybe 1 or 2 questions before we finish off. So any indication of when the assessment center test will take place? My guess is possibly spring. spring 2021, or let's say early in the new year, so probably around February or March 2021. Again, it's a rough estimate. We'll see how things develop, but that's an idea. Field-related test, what top percentage do you estimate? I think I answered that with, again, rough estimate, perhaps 35 points out of 40 that will likely get you to the next stage. What is the level of difficulty of questions of field-related test? Is it higher or similar to CAST law? It might be slightly more difficult, I would guess. So 80 law tests are often not that easy. So that is usually, so the bar is relatively high when it comes to such open competition on a field such as law. And here, what is the percentage of laureates on the reserve list who actually get a job posting? And that's a really good question, and the one we'll finish off with is it's not 100%. So in all transparency, not everyone will land a job who is on the reserve list, but often it's because of candidates. Because now you might be in a situation where your dream job is to get into the institutions, but in 9 months, you may have moved to Argentina to open a steak restaurant, and you no longer want to be an EU lawyer. So personal situations change, life changes, and not everyone who completes the test and even placed on the reserve list will land the job. But there's certainly demand, and there's a very reason why they open these competitions. They ask the institutions of their personnel needs. So by and large, whoever wants to get a job from a reserve list does end up getting a job. It might take a little longer, but they do. And actually, there's a webinar on our website which says how to get a job once you are on a reserve list. So when you get to that stage, check out that webinar, and hopefully that gives you some practical ideas. So with that, please make sure to share this presentation and the webinar and all the resources we made available with your friends or whoever you think is interested in the competition. Ask us questions, reach out, get in touch with us. We're very happy to help you. And thank you so much for staying during your lunchtime, if you're in Central or Western European time zones, with me and listening to this webinar. Much appreciated, and much appreciated to Lenka and Veronica, who helped me in the background, silently and efficiently, making sure everything works very smoothly. And it's Lenka's excellent design skills that need to be commended, because she helped me put together the presentation. So thanks for everyone. Good luck for the competition. Stay tuned for further resources that we'll be sharing with you. And if there's anything we can help your success, just let us know. So enjoy the rest of your summer, and hope to see you in person in Brussels as an EU official fairly soon. Thanks for being here.